perhaps one of the most intriguing subjects on the planet now and in the past has been the subject of the legend of Sasquatch or the Yeti, depending where you are in the world. And too often the story is fraught with fear and violence. And today we're going to take a completely different look at the subject with a man named Sunbo, who has gone into direct communication with the Sasquatch. And it's an absolutely beautiful story that I think will really elevate people's way of seeing things. And welcome, Sunbo. I'm so happy to see you here in British Columbia. It was by happen chance, thank God, that we had a chance to meet, because I love this story, and I've been intrigued with Sasquatch for many years, and I find it deeply disturbing that so many journalists and alternative journalists even throw Sasquatch under the subject of cryptozoology, which is essentially treating Sasquatch as though they're another animal. And this is not your experience, and we're going to get deeply into that in a moment. But first, I want the audience to know a little bit more about you. So who were you before the whole phenomena of Sasquatch came into your life?
Well, thank you. I've been pretty much on the shamanic path for the last 35 years. Mm-hmm. Mostly I learned a lot with native elders of over 40 nations. And I've been through ceremonies with them and received teachings on spiritual matters, which has been my main guidance in life to this point. And so I got used pretty early to paranormal phenomena mm-hmm. and supernatural and spirit manifestations. And so I had this background, and I also studied different spiritual paths, like the Vedas, different traditions. Mm-hmm. But when I met the Sasquatch and started communicating openly with them, that's, I say they upgraded me, because the experiences came with teaching and understanding of about interdimensionality.
That features really largely into the story, I noticed in reading your books. Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you a quick question, backing up just a bit. The Native American and Canadian tribes that you've dealt with in particular, did they all have Sasquatch as part of their knowledge base or contact, or just certain tribes? Was the understanding of Sasquatch ubiquitous among them or not?
Just about every tribe has some Sasquatch stories in their tradition. Mm-hmm. They're not all the same stories. They don't all have the same relation with the Sasquatch. But just about every tribe has a name for them. Mm-hmm. And I found several elders who had knowledge about them without having necessarily a direct experience. Mm-hmm. But they have in their collective consciousness and their culture, they have the knowledge of those beings. Mm-hmm. And so in my research, before I met Sasquatch, my best source of information about them came from the native traditions, because they had generations of interactions with them to this day. Mm-hmm. There are places I've been in BC, for instance, where Sasquatch stories are part of almost daily life. Everybody has a relative that has met them. Mm-hmm. So for them, it's a very well-known phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And I can say that some tribes are not as familiar with them. Mm-hmm. For instance, I was adopted by the Hopi Coyote clan back in '87. And this year I returned there and spent 3 months with them on the reservation, where I was invited twice to speak about Sasquatch in some small Hopi groups. It's kind of rare that they invite an outsider to speak on Hopi group. And they have a very, very elaborate pantheon and mythology, and they talk about all kinds of star peoples and different beings. But they were trying to figure out where the Sasquatch fits in their story. What we concluded after those discussions is that the only place they could fit Sasquatch is when they arrived in this world. The Hopi met a man they called Wokokuktaka, the man who lives big footprints. Mm-hmm. And he was a giant and they were afraid, so they sent messengers to make peace. And they brought offerings to him. And he said, I haven't been brought any offerings in a long time. I am the keeper of the land. You can live here if you live a peaceful life. And they know him now as Masao, which is one of the main deity, we can say, or main spiritual being of their pantheon. Same with Navajos who live in the same area. They had contact long ago with Sasquatch. For some reason, kind of lost the contact. Mm-hmm. But in the last couple of decades, there is more and more sightings in those areas. There's even a special corps of Navajo policemen who investigate Sasquatch and UFO sightings.
Yes. A lot of paranormal researchers now investigating all over the world, really. Mm. What's interesting, I first became intrigued when I was talking with my own beings. I have my own guides and such, and talking with them about 30 years ago about these beings and asking what the nature of the being was. And ultimately what I came to understand that this is a distinctly separate species from humans with almost identical DNA, but not exactly. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that. But that have their original capabilities by having stayed separate from humans, which of course so much destruction happens with humans, but also to have stayed in very close harmony cosmically and with the earth to keep their abilities intact. So this particular species is really one of the last remaining that is intact in their abilities, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's launch into that and find out how you first came in contact, because this is intriguing for, I think, everybody.
All right. Yeah, it's quite a long story. I had my first encounter in April '83 in the petrified forest of Arizona. And back then, I didn't have the knowledge to understand what was happening. I saw a Sasquatch walk and sit about 100 feet from me.
Tell us what they look like in size and portion, everything.
Yeah. There's different types of Sasquatch. Just because of so many million years of evolution, as well on different planets, has given them a range of genetics. Mm-hmm.
So the one you saw the first time was, how could you describe him or her?
Yeah. Well, they're hairy from head to toe. And they are taller than us in general, but there are also some that are smaller. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen those yet. But that one, the thing is a Sasquatch are interdimensional beings. So they can come in a totally physical form or differently.
By raising and lowering their density.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So that Sasquatch I first saw I could see very clearly the being, the shape, but I could kind of see through like a hologram. And he animated 3D images for me that of the time they were walking with the dinosaurs.
Oh, so they were showing you holographic images telepathically?
Yeah.
Okay, and that seems to be everyone's experiences. There is this telepathic experience.
Yeah, definitely.
And this first feeling that happens when they come in contact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So for me, that first experience, I didn't know how to interpret it. I thought it was a vision, because I had visions. It took me over 30 years to learn and understand that the Sasquatch are interdimensional beings.
Mm-hmm. So they were showing you imagery from kind of what we would think of as prehistory with the dinosaurs and so forth. What was the point of projecting these particular images to you now that time has passed and you've had a chance to think about it?
Well, it's been confirmed by the messages they asked me to write just the last couple of years. And I've also seen this year half a dozen places some footprints petrified in the rock, usually bigger than ours. I saw a very clear 18 inches footprint with all the toes, and and that's on a dinosaur bed, fossil bed.
Right, and yeah, these are in very remote areas, obviously, right?
Yeah,
okay.
In the desert, Painted Desert mostly. So this shows that, without a doubt, there were humanoid beings walking on this planet back then.
Yes, millions of years ago. Right. Okay, so you after this encounter, this first encounter, where you were given holographic images of the past and shown really a time frame even where the Sasquatch already existed, then you were able to later find the evidence within that time frame, fossilized evidence of them as well, right? So that's kind of a starting point for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then as you moved a little bit further into it, I want to get to the part 2 where you started getting physical proofs and validations that you could bring back with you. So let's talk about that journey.
Right. I had then heard a call in 86, Northern California, which is that kind of call that no animal or human can make. Then in 2003, well, there's a few other.
You mean you heard a sound?
Yeah.
Like a call, a unique call. Okay.
Like I would say a scream, because there was a dog barking after it. It freezes your blood. It's really powerful, really loud. There were a few other anecdotes, but then in 2003, on Vancouver Island with a friend, we were coming back from ceremonies with natives. In the middle of the rainforest, we saw Sasquatch totally materialized, totally physical, and we felt what most people will describe in their first sighting, this kind of psychic energy that paralyzes.
Right, that stuns you so you really can't make a move one way or another, right?
Yeah.
I've heard about this.
We kind of froze for 30 seconds, where we could not react at all.
I mean, was this something that made you or your companion fearful, or did you know otherwise?
It's kind of impressive. I'm not sure if you kind of decide if you're afraid or not, basically. Because, the dog with us turned mad. And when we saw this being, we were rolling by and went into the wood, I wanted to stop. My friend didn't want to stop. So I guess I was not that afraid. But that experience taught me that day is that the Sasquatch are definitely strong psychic beings. So they're not animals and they're not primitive people.
So aside from the feeling of being stunned and not running away from the situation, did something follow that? What followed?
Well, mainly this understanding that I had that day, a very clear sign, proof, I would say, that the Sasquatch are definitely not animals or primitive beings.
Right.
They are very evolved psychically, and so they are something else.
Right.
Than what cryptozoologists, for instance,
right.
or even anthropologists would.
It's its own species, which we have not accommodated for that notion, because we've been looking in terms of a very linear type of evolution from one state to another, not understanding there were many developments of many beings in the very beginning, right?
Yeah. Since they found human DNA carries at least 265 identified genes that are horizontal additions.
Horizontal additions, what's that mean?
That means they didn't come from ancestral lineage. They were introduced
Inserted.
at some point
Yeah.
in our human race. So we're not the only ones either.
Right. I mean, I like to say there's no one that's really a native. We're all hybridized on one
Yeah.
on one level or another. At what point did they begin kind of communicating to you about their past, and what did they say about themselves?
It started when in 2014 when I came out west.
About 3 or 4 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. And what happened is that I went back for the first time. I went to where my native ancestors come from in northern Saskatchewan.
Northern Saskatchewan. Okay, your own bloodline.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm part Cree.
Part Cree Indian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I did research, and I found the grave of my great-great-grandfather. And I contacted some third-degree Cree cousins. And I heard that story about my great-great-grandfather when he was about 8. Him and his twin brother were found in the wilderness in the Northwest Territories by some Cree trappers. They were living in a hut of branches, wearing rawhide, eating bugs and roots, and they didn't speak any human language.
Your great-great-grandfather.
Yeah, so when I asked about that story to my cousin, she said, "We have Sasquatch in the family." So then I understood not only that I'm 1/32nd Sasquatch, but that triggered me to want to know who are those beings, and they're so close from us, yet so hidden.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to do a lot of intensive research, and as I said earlier, I found most valid information from native sources, because there's a lot of disinformation and speculations and made-up stories that do not describe Sasquatch as
Right. Right. So then at one point one of the elders reached out to you
Yeah.
and started communicating telepathically with you directly, and basically said, "We want you to record this information and share it with the world."
Yeah. It took a year before I was ready to openly communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And during that year, they kept contacting me. It was pretty impressive at the beginning. I didn't understand what was going on. I would hear heavy footsteps on the roof. I was living in a school bus. The school bus which moved.
A school bus, and you heard footsteps on the roof of the school bus.
A few times.
Yeah.
And as a coincidence, the following year, a couple living in that same school bus had the same phenomenon.
Do they have kind of more advanced physical capabilities, more dexterous, easier to, move than human brothers and sisters?
Yeah, they have definitely very high developed psychic abilities, interdimensional abilities.
They have physical as well?
Yeah. They have. They're the strongest beings on this planet.
Okay, so now you hear this walking on the top of the school bus you're living in, all right? Then what happens?
All kind of phenomena were happening around me. I would hear whispers next to me. One night, one walked and looked at me through the window, and my mind was not ready to accept it. What we call cognitive dissonance. If we don't know it,
Cognitive dissonance, yeah.
If we don't know it or can't explain it, it's easier to deny. But those things kept happening until a year later I said, well, I really want to know, and I'm ready. And they were calling me actually all this time.
And when they started talking to you, because the book goes quite a bit into interdimensionality, speed of light, different dimensions and so forth, and the nature of the dimensions, these, I assume, were areas you were particularly versed in before they started talking to you, or?
Well, they kind of asked me to transcribe those messages because I was probably well prepared. That's what they explained to me, all those years of spiritual search and learning.
So you were a clear receiver.
Yeah.
So you were receiving the messages. I'm wondering, though, because of the sophistication of a lot of the messages coming through about multidimensionality, if that was new information for you.
Yeah, most often, well, I had bits and pieces of all those informations, but they put it all together and in a coherent whole that makes it all clear. For me, it's like, and for many others, I believe, it's coming with explanation.
Right. It puts it in context.
Yeah.
And why did they say it was so important for humanity to begin understanding multidimensionality in general and our own multidimensionality as well?
Yeah, because we live in a very materialistic society, and we've seen what it does to our lives as well as to all life on this planet. There's a very dramatic environmental destruction. There's wars ongoing and always a new one. So this is caused by a very limited understanding of who we are and what is the universe. We know now that matter is about 4% of the energy that is calculated, that is perceivable. So this 96% left is also reality. It's also part of us, part of the universe, the fabrics of the continuums. So by understanding what are those other parts and how they're intertwined, how they interact, we can understand better ourselves as well as our place in the universe, how to interact with what's around.
And to take some of the emphasis on just the material aspect of life, because that is the part we're not interfacing with well. We're causing a lot of destruction.
Yeah.
And including into their domains. Destroying their potential to continue on Earth.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems their only salvation has been to remain in the most remote private areas beyond the human reach.
And that is why at this time they are reaching out to us humans. And I have to say that when I had my first communications with them, I had never heard of people talking with Sasquatch before. And now 2 years later, there are hundreds around the world that have come in contact, that are sharing those messages.
Are there common elements to these messages?
Definitely. As the third book of the Sasquatch Message to Humanity, they asked me to write the first two. And for the third book, they gathered 12 of us who channel the Sasquatch messages. All those messages are completing each other, and you can feel they come from the same source. And there's at least 3 or 4 others in this team that channel the same elder that started.
Camus.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because they go into real specificity. For example, when I was reading some of the part, well, there are a few things. The multidimensionality and the explanation of the various dimensions in time and space. Also, another area I was intrigued with is they're very well aware of and do warn about beings that are coming into our reality pretending to be something that they're not. Because this is affecting their world as well as our world. Let's go with there. Let's talk about beings that are kind of coming in and appearing to be bearers of light, the illuminated ones, and their description of what these beings oftentimes are.
Yeah. Well, the whole purpose of life, how they explain it, is the evolution of consciousness, which involves healing and learning, understanding. And there are forces in the universe that support us in this process, and that will offer help and guidance, protection. There are also some forces that work against us. They want to keep us under control, cut us from our spiritual understanding and nature, and to keep their grip. So on this planet, we're facing those two energies.
And the Sasquatch were really telling of both.
Yeah.
Explaining this, how this works together.
The Sasquatch have kept in contact with the star people, which more precisely the star elders, the council of star elders, because there's all kind of people in the universe, but there are some elders whose role is to maintain balance and watch over the world.
And one of the things, just to insert here, is that some people, I've heard this in the reports of some of the cryptozoologists, confuse the shadow people on native lands with the Sasquatch, because they can appear in different densities. They can appear as a dark shadow, they can appear as physical, or as light reflecting from them as well. It's their choice. They say all things that are dark are not dense and low in consciousness, and all things that are light are not necessarily higher in consciousness. It's simply a matter of how that entity is interfacing with light itself.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, for instance, we, in our materialistic perspective,
right,
we tend to see light as the highest vibration and frequency, because that's true for the physical world. Beyond the speed of light, matter dissolves, it becomes pure energy, and time stops. It becomes a unified field. But what vibrates faster than light it's not necessarily lower in energy.
It just doesn't emit visible light for our recognition. And that really helped me with the piece too, because when I've gone to the most infinite places where I'm meeting with just consciousness, it is a void. It's just completely, it's dark, it's void of any particles of light, but it's pure awareness, pure connection, and pure consciousness. And for years I thought, gosh, what kind of place have I gone to? It felt beautiful and complete and uplifting. But really, stories such as this help me understand it's an illusion. It's a material illusion to think there always has to be shining light around a very elevated experience. That isn't true.
Yeah. For instance, what we call dark matter or black matter, they call it alter matter. It's matter, but not physical matter.
It's like a field of potential that consciousness must be applied to take any kind of form.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they go into this quite a bit. I like that part because I'm intrigued with that anyway, and the way we construct our reality, and they do share quite a bit with you about that.
Yeah, this dark matter is what makes our subtle bodies, or we could say astral bodies. Very, very tiny particles that go right through matter. So neutrinos are one class of them. But they always interact constantly with matter, and just like our emotional bodies do. When we die, we lose half an ounce.
Right.
And that is this body that detaches.
Right.
So this matter is much more subtle and much less dense. But it is a substance. It does have a certain mass.
And yet this mass, as humanity, tends to live a very short time span. And they talk about the nature of you know, again, the whole journey is the expansion of awareness, consciousness, elevation of that. And yet we're in a physical body that has a very short kind of time span in which to experience that on Earth. How did they explain that to you? Why the uniquely short lifespan of humans, even compared to themselves who live into the hundreds of years, as we once did too, long ago?
Yeah, exactly. Our first ancestors used to live much longer. We have to mention our origins, because that explains a lot. We as humans have had genetics brought what we call star seeds from other planets in our lineage.
Yes.
The Sasquatch as well, but long before us. So this star seeds is carrying consciousness and a great psychic potential. What happened over the course of our evolution, we kind of got slowly disconnected due to outside influences. There are forces that came on Earth that tried to split us from our ancestral wisdom. So and there were also genetic manipulations done. So that shortened a lot our lifespan.
Yes.
And our chance to evolve and learn in one lifetime.
And a lot of that is encoded in our DNA, that ancestral memory, but it goes beyond ancestral. The DNA also seems to serve as a tuning device, so to speak, for the higher aspect of our own beings. And we've become so disconnected from that. As you say, according to the Sasquatch and many other people, intentionally. And just as we wrap up this conversation, which I consider to be only an introduction because I want to have you back on a few more times and get much deeper into the knowledge they've imparted to you, why did they say the other beings have tried to thwart our development as a human species?
It's a matter of free choice. Some have chosen a path of evolution and some of regression. If we take, for example, our human race, it's hard to put ourselves on the scale. Are we a benevolent or malevolent species for the other life forms? It's really hard to answer that.
It's highly individual, too.
Yeah, exactly. It's up to individual choices and souls. And so there are groups that have chosen detrimental path.
Yes.
And some have chosen beneficial. And they get the result accordingly. Us humans are at a crossroad now with all our level of technology, which if it's not coupled with consciousness, can cause our destruction.
We're going to talk about that in our next discussion, which we'll probably do via Skype since you're all over the world. But one thing the one final question I just have here is that human beings tend to have a huge inferiority complex. We've been made on many levels throughout the last several thousand years, at least, in our traditions, to feel less than, and that other beings are more than, right? And yet, we have this amazing ability to create. Just the music and poetry and art and so forth that human beings are able of creating shows that we have very, very high capacities beyond really many, if not most other species. We're just not accessing this aspect of self. Did they talk to you about this and give you any instruction even on how we can start doing this integration better?
Yeah, basically it's to reconnect with all the aspects of our multidimensional being. We have a mind, but it's just an antenna. Consciousness has no place in space.
This is just a processing unit. Yeah,
exactly. Consciousness is beyond physical and linear time. So this is what we have to tap into, understand all the different aspects of our being, and of the universe around us.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, because we're literally out of time here, everybody's got to go different places right now. I just want to thank you so much for taking time spontaneously to meet with me here in BC. And then we can pick it up on Skype or something like that, one of those technologies down the road, and get into how they describe the dimensions and light and space and time, and how all of this works together to create our reality and how we can start transcending it. Right?
Yeah.
Bo, again, I want to thank you for taking the time spontaneously here in BC to spend with me. And just so people can get an idea of some of what we're talking about before we even talk again, you have a couple of books that are out right now, if you want to just give us the titles and where they can find them.
Yeah. The Sasquatch Message to Humanity. Book 1 is a conversation with Elder Camus. Book 2 is Interdimensional Teachings from Our Elders. They both can be found on Amazon.
Perfect. So that makes it easy enough, because nobody's going to reach you easily because you're all over and you're in remote places all the time, but they can connect with the information. So until next time, and I look forward to the third book coming out, I very much thank you again for your time.
Thank you.